also he has come over to talk about the very important topic of social work today. And without taking much of his time, I thank him and I welcome him on behalf of Madras Plus Social Work, Department of Social Work and Social Work Forum, student forum, which is organizing this webinar series from 3 days. And quite a number of people have joined. And I welcome Paiju sir for his constant support on behalf of everyone. Further, without taking any delay, I hand over him over to Baiju sir. Baiju sir can start the session. The session will be like this. Sir will present and talk to you for 30 to 40 minutes, and then we will have Srinidhi or not the student rapporteur. Uh, we'll start the consolidating question. They will ask the questions, or you can also ask the question and in between. Okay, sorry, at the end of the session. Over to Baiju sir. Over to Baiju sir.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Respect to Dr. Satyamurthy, other faculty members, and all the participants who have joined this seminar. I appreciate this opportunity as an to share my thoughts on critical social work practice in India. I'll take some 30 to 40 minutes on sharing my thoughts. Then we can have some question session and discussion around that. I think I'll start by sharing my PowerPoint. That'll actually help me to keep myself organized. Okay. I hope everyone can see the PowerPoint now. Am I right?
It's clear. It is clear. It is clear.
Okay. So the way I have organized this session is I'll basically give an introduction about critical social work, then go on talking about some of the assumptions that would be challenged while we talk about critical social work. Then we will also look at how do we practice critical social work. And I will take two situation examples from Indian context to discuss further on how do we actually implement a critical social work perspective in the practice. So starting from conventional approaches in social work, we realize that even after decades of social welfare, people are living in dehumanized situations, and that such a situation is increasing. We believe that society is made up of institutions which are able to serve the individual so long as he makes full use of the opportunities for personal, social, educational, financial success. So this is one underlying assumption in conventional approach, that we propose that there are institutions available in the society where the individual has to make use of these opportunities for his or her personal success. And what we do, the social workers do, are to guide the individuals toward coping better with the prevailing structure. I see somebody raising their hands. So can you hear me, or should I answer any questions? I'm not able to access the chat box, but
no, sir. Actually, you can present, sir. Participants will have a question in the last, sir, because they don't want to disturb. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. So, and we do not actually challenge the conventional institutions of political, social, economic policies. So this is one of the approach followed in the conventional social work approach, where we say that we have institutions that are meant to help the self-fulfillment of the individual, whereas the individual has to make use of these things. And what social work do is helping the individual to cope up with these systems, these structures, make use of them, and be successful in their life. Whereas when it comes to critical social work, we change the paradigm and we ask why these institutions are capable of the needs of individuals, and if not, why. We say that these institutions are there to meet the needs of people, but there are people who have not been able to access these institutions and be successful or satisfy their needs. Why do so much people still remain in poverty? And interestingly, rich people become richer, and there is an increasing gap between rich and poor, haves and have-nots. So critical social work is basically about critiquing, asking questions on why such a inequity exists even after decades of social welfare, social work practice, and interventions. It basically uses a Marxian framework for analysis. Rather than focusing upon the individual whom we serve, we look at the structures, the systems in which the person lives to meet the needs of the person. It also looks at some of the alternative ways of making changes in the existing system. To look at the history of social work, as we all know, social work has been evolved as a profession just for 125 years. I mean, even not 25 years, because it was in 1898, the first school of social work, the first school of social work, we cannot call it as a social work school, but a social work training program was started by the present Columbia University. It was in 1930s, social work became a profession, or it was regarded as a profession, again, starting from US, Canada, UK, and other developing nations. And in 1930s, 40s, we had a kind of inclination to focus upon psychological theories, and it had a kind of heavy emphasis on behavioral things. Whereas when it came to 1970s, when there was lots of changes happening with the theoretical framework, especially with the postmodern theories. That is when we went to adapt these postmodern theories into social practice. So the critical social work has been a result of social work research, use of social work theories from various disciplines for last 30 or 40 years. It is still getting a momentum in the social work practice. My experience with social work education practice in Canada has given me more and more opportunities to understand critical social work perspectives, how they have been applied in social work practice. So this critical paradigm has been developed for last 3 or 4 decades. Now, this critical paradigm challenges some of the assumptions that we usually have in social work practice. And one is victim blaming. We often say that everyone has equal chance. And it is a failure of the person to make of these opportunities which leads to the failure of the person. It has to do with the individual deficits. The system is always fine, and we are motivating the clients that we work with in order to adjust with the system and enhance their capacity to make use of the existing systems and structures. Social work, critical social work challenges that. It also challenges some of the underlying notions that is followed in every society. Women as inferior, or the dominance of patriarchy in several forms. All those class, caste, demographic superiorities, which is very evident in Indian context, not only in Indian context, everywhere. Like to refer to one of the contemporary examples, what we see in US as well as across the globe after the brutal death of George Floyd by a policeman in US. There is also an assumption that consumption brings happiness. The more luxurious goods you have, that is seen as an indicator of a success or a growth or a happiness. And critical social work is challenging that. We often find that it is the individual's ability to adjust with the situations that help the people to thrive in their life. And education institutions and professional organizations continue to perpetuate all these class privileges. So these assumptions that is underlined in social society, which is being perpetuated by education, even in our social practice, is being challenged when we look at through critical social work paradigms. We talk a lot about power in critical social work. It could be derived of the legitimate context of the person. Legitimate power could be, say, for example, the power given to a teacher or a police person or a government officer, or perceived authority of a person because of their position or their knowledge, and that gives control over other people. There is personal merit, demerits derived from location of a person or a client. And there are people who have privileges. Privileges could be understood as the invisible advantage and resultant unearned benefits of a person. To give an example, a person from upper caste is always considered, or most often considered, as a person with more knowledge, or they are more respected than a person from a lower caste. A man is often considered as a kind of more strong than women. Those are some of the privileges. A man can walk alone at night, where it is not very easy for a woman to walk at night alone, and that is a privilege attributed to male gender. We talk a lot about opportunities, merit, oppression, privilege, cycle of advantage, cycle of disadvantage, intersectionality of oppression. So if you look at this perspective, the way we place them is people, individuals in the society are advantaged or disadvantaged in several ways. People have privileges. People have merits associated not with of their individual capacity, but with part of the system and the institutions or the structures they live in. In critical social work, you can assume several viewpoints. You can follow a kind of feminist viewpoint. You can follow a kind of radical framework. You can follow a structural perspective. What I'll be focusing more upon will be a kind of structural perspective in this presentation. In order to explain this paradigm in a better way, let me give you an example of two individuals, A and B. A hails from a Chennai city. A's parents are well educated. One person is a college professor and another parent is a government servant. A lives in a bungalow type house. A is a male. A's grandparents were also serving in government service. They are well educated, they are graduates. Let us take an example of B. B hails from a rural area in Tamil Nadu. B's parents are less educated, or one of them is illiterate, one of them has lower primary education. B is living in a kind of dilapidated house. The nearest college of B is, say, 25 kilometers away from their house. And B's wealth is basically they have, say, 50 cents of land. And B is a girl. And B's parents are working as daily wage earners. So let us look at these two examples, A and B. And who has more privileges? It is obviously A. Who has more disadvantages by the institutions they live in? B. And there is an intersectionality of oppression. When I say intersectionality of oppression, there is more than one layer of oppression which limits the potential of B thriving to be successful or to meet the needs of their life. So if you look at the character of B, one of the intersectionality of oppression is their location. Second is the family history. And I also add the factor of caste, because B is from a lower caste. Fourth is gender. It is she. And you can go on adding that. If that person is a handicapped person, physically handicapped person, there is still one more layer of oppression happening. So assuming these two characters, we work with both of them. And what we do, our stand is that, you have to make use of all these opportunities. You cannot get to admission to a college because you cannot, you don't work hard. You are blaming the victim, saying and suggesting that whatever problems you have is not because the institutions around you or the structures that you live in, it is because of your inability to make use of those structures. And that is one of the approach most often been followed in conventional social work practice. Whereas critical social worker says, no, you don't blame the victim. You look at the structures, the institutions, the society the person is, and see who is privileged, who is not privileged, who is disadvantaged, who is discriminated, who is being oppressed due to several of these factors, and how do you address those oppressions which limits the potential and the capacity of a person to access the resources. Do we talk about accessing resources for social workers, or do we talk about adjustment? One word that I repeatedly heard when I was studying for my master's of social work program way back in 20 years back was adjustment. And I was wondering, how do we say adjust, adjust, adjust? That is most often what we do. And the critical social workers say, of course, we need to adjust. But is it the person alone need to adjust? Or is it the system that we need to mend? And when I say we need to look at the structures and system, it is getting more political. And what I mean by political is basically power dynamics involved in it. It becomes radical. It is directed more towards social action. But when we look at the methods of social work, be it case work, be it group work, be it community organization, or be it the secondary methods of social justice, social action, or any other methods, we can have this framework, this approach followed. So critical social work is affirmative action. It is restoring justice for every person. It is an inclusive development for people. And it is focusing upon social justice and human rights, which are the two underpinning values of social work. So what I have done so far is basically establishing the paradigm of critical social work perspectives in social work. As I told you earlier, this is not very old. This is much significantly different from the conventional approaches in social work, where our focus is focusing upon the client or the person that we work with and encouraging the person to make adjustment to the existing systems. Whereas in critical social work paradigm, we look at why this person is still neglected. Why this person is still poor? Is it just because of the incapacity of the person to thrive for it, to make use of it? Or are there institutional factors that limit the capacity of this person for thriving? And we understand that there are lots of structural factors that limit the capacity of a client to make use of the resources. And how do we address those things? So let us look at some of the ways for practicing critical social work. It is very easy to say all these theories. I'm not going to much of the theoretical frameworks of it. I'm directly coming to the application part of it. So there is one person coming to you, and this person has several immediate needs, and we always start by addressing the immediate needs of a client. So if there is a person, a poor person coming to you, and if the person is hungry, what is need to be done first is giving the person food. Or if the person is needing of a shelter, what is required to be given is shelter. Then only we can get into the subsequent issues of the institution structures that affects or putting the person in a situation of poverty. So we also need to look at how do we social policy interventions happen. Along with making the person capable of making use of the existing resources, how can we bring in social policies that changes the policies in favor of this person? Social action and movements. Whatever benefits that we have enjoyed so far in our country, not only in our country, in the whole world, is because of the social action and movements. And look at the social action and movements happening against racial discrimination throughout the world right now. How many people are on the streets? And do we see this as part of social work? Yes, it is. Social legislations, lots of changes have been affected by social legislations. I was looking at, and if you look at the history of India, we have social legislations that has triggered social change in India. So 1955, we have the first Untouchability Abolition Act. Well, we can argue that that act is not still implemented properly. I agree to that. But it was those legislations that gave legal protection. Then subsequently, this was amended as a Civil Rights Act. Then we have several other case laws, social legislations, rules and acts that support for civil liberties, protection of civil rights of people. And social workers have played a big role in that. Social activists have played a big role in that. Okay. Consciousness rising that we often do. And consciousness rising is not just for adapting, adjusting, it is also for challenging the existing paradigms in the society. Collective unions. And unions is one way to address the issues of the people who have been historically deprived. So people who are part of the collective unions have better rights. They are protected of their employment and their rights, whereas people who are not part of the unions are in the unorganized sector and they don't enjoy the benefits of any of the collective unions.
Mm-hmm.
Alternative approaches in working with deprived communities. What alternative approach can we bring in? So, for example, in the education, do we have a kind of non-formal education? And now we are getting to an alternative approaches education through online learning. Like this is one way, like how the technology is helping us. Like I am sitting in Canada, well, some 12,000 kilometers away from Chennai, and simultaneously communicating with a group of people sitting in a different country. Representative democracy. We have Panchayat Raj system in India, where it is at least an attempt to make a representative democracy where people who are influenced by the decisions are part of the decision-making process. Political actions. Political actions are part of social work. How do we move with the politics? It is not actually partisan politics. It is basically politics is basically power dynamics. How far are we able to access the power, the decision-making process, and turn that power, those actions, in favor of the people that we work with? Social workers always work with the vulnerable people who are prone to poverty, who are suffering from their individual, family, and social problems. Can we make some kind of political decisions in favor of them? Social preferential policies and reservations. That is why we talk about reservations, the need for reservations. How far are we able to bring those historically deprived people into the front line through preferential policies like reservations? Technological advancement does help people to access the resources in a better way. And there are much more. So these are some of the means for accessing or making use of the critical social work paradigms. And this depends upon the societal context that social workers work in, the cultural context, the political dimensions of a society, the social milieu of a society. And it is for the social worker to identify which way can we challenge the existing paradigms of social paradigms and structures of society. Which way can I challenge the factors that limit the capacity of my clients? So, having discussed some of the ways for critical social work, let me take two examples from contemporary Indian scenario to discuss further on how do we actually apply a critical social perspective. So what social work approach would we follow while working with these migrant laborers? So this is one starking reality that that make us all cry seeing these pictures of migrant laborers walking for kilometers and kilometers in different parts of the country. What do we do to support them? As social workers, where do we play a role? Does our conventional approaches help in resolving the flight of these people? Does social workers can ensure that these things are not being repeated again and again in our country? And I take this case example. And I'm looking at some of this. This is a very simple analysis to give you some more idea on the social work uh, framework for application of critical social work. So one of the issues that leads migrant laborers to move out of their village is poverty. And if you look at the conventional approach, we may go for community kitchen or providing them with some kind of food supplements. Whereas a progressive critical approach, I'm using the word progressive, radical, critical, all interchangeably. Whereas they are different in a subtle way, but I take that perspective altogether. Whereas we look for sustainable livelihood solutions to these people. And how does sustainable livelihood solutions come through? They have to have the land, ownership over land. They have to have the technology. They have to have the capital. So when we said about sustainable livelihood solutions, do they have the capital to farm, or do they have the capital, enough capital to invest in starting a small entrepreneurship? Do they have the skill for marketing it? We are not just saying about give them a temporary job for 100, which is 100 rupees a day. We are thinking about giving a livelihood which ensures a dignified life for them. We have some notions. Oh, they are people from rural areas. They are farmers. They are from lower caste. So this is enough for them. Whereas a person from a upper caste or upper class living in a city, oh, they will need much more. That is a kind of conventional paradigm that we use. And critical social work is challenging that. They too do have the right for a dignified, decent living through sustainable livelihood solutions. Let us look at the job security of migrant laborers. They don't have a security. They could be thrown out of job anytime. So alternative employment, skill development. So we teach them on how you can acquire a new job in the given situations. Whereas we look at some kind of critical ways of working with them. Consciousness rising of their consciousness about their rights. Forming trade unions, legislations in favor of them. So most of the unorganized people working in various sectors in India are not part of trade unions. So let me give another example. So we have millions of people, immigrant laborers working in slums in Mumbai, Delhi, and other industrial areas. And do we have a union for them? Does the government consult with their union leaders before declaring a lockdown? Nobody consults with the migrant laborers. There is nobody to represent them. And trade union is one way to represent. So they get an opportunity, time for reaching their places or whatever arrangements they need to do before lockdown. And that becomes a political action in social work practice. And unfortunately, these are not considered as part of social work practice, and they are. And that is how social work is working. We are actually creeping in, or we are hand-holding with other social activists, other disciplines, while we work as social workers in these areas. And caste is a big issue, which of course is also one triggering fact to becoming immigrant labor. And most often what we do is like teaching to adjust to the realities, or we still follow a kind of fatalistic attitude. This is a fate. This is how we are born. And this is not just for in India. This is all over the world. So I have been teaching social work practice education in Canada for the last 7 years, and I have students whom I want to critically reflect upon the realities in Canada. Like, this discrimination is there in all parts of the world in one way or the other. So in Canada, we have at least close to 5% of the Aboriginal people, and they are facing discrimination. And I have students who write an assignment saying, oh, this is how God created everyone. I said, no. You cannot actually blame the deprivation of a person in the name of God. You cannot call it as fatalistic. You look at the structures around and how the institutionalized discrimination happens through education, government policies, and the social realities. And you think about how do you challenge it? How do we become part of it? So I have to be self-reflective in myself when I talk about this, because I'm a man and I have privilege of that. And I also become part of patriarchy. And how do I become part of the uh, system, an oppressive system in some way? So let us look into the progressive approach. Caste issues. Do we have collective bodies, advocacy, reservations? And there are people who still argue against reservation. We don't need reservations. And reservation is still one of the proven ways to lift the people who have been historically disadvantaged for decades and centuries. People who have been disadvantaged from oppression, from slavery, and this is one way to get them rid of it. And we still know we don't want it. And this is one critical way to look at it. So how do we support Dalit movements? Do we form unions for them? Do we form collective bodies, or do we say this is you get a scholarship, you become? Of course, we cannot go by exceptions. We look at the whole community and see how can we provide them a dignified life in challenging all the oppressive forces happening in the society. So these are some of the kind of random thoughts on progressive approaches, which challenges, which critique the existing paradigms of society. This is one example. You may have several thoughts on this one. I'll go to one more example, which is very easy for us to understand. This is a common scenario. Let us look at domestic violence as a social issue in India. And if you look at some of the reasons or issues behind it, one is education and employment of women. In conventional approaches, what we do, we give them kind of saving schemes. We run some kind of awareness programs. Perhaps in a more critical way, we give them education to lead independent life. I'm repeating the word independent life. Some of our education are often basically still perpetuating the fact that a girl is to be sent in marriage and be part of a family that is being dominated by man. And we still follow that patriarchal norm. Do we think about securing employment for economic independence for women? We talk about a lot about immigration. Like, I'm from Kerala, and there are lots of people from Kerala. So as from Tamil Nadu and different parts of India living in developing countries like US, Canada, Australia, UK, and Europe places. And one of the significant merit for the women there? People are economically independent. And that actually limits the potential for domestic violence. Whereas in Indian context, women are often dependent upon the wealth of the husband or the family, and they cannot be economically independent so as to ascertain their life. And patriarchal norms. We may run something about awareness programs for women, orientation, social disability, like, how should a woman behave, they should dress, all those things comes in. And how often do we challenge the patriarchal institution of family? And family is a patriarchal institution. When I say patriarchal institutions, this has been developed, controlled, managed, and power used by man. It is universally so. Do we challenge it? Do we also look at women's collective challenging inferior treatment of women? Of course, we have some examples, but they are kind of stray examples. They are not the norm that we follow. And security in public life. Are women secure in public life? We may have some kind of shelter homes, temporary living support. And how about facilities for independent living? A legislation for state and family economic support. One example I can quote is like basically from Iran. Iran is a very conservative society in the context of religion. But the legislation there for divorce is that if a woman is being divorced by her husband, the husband has to give the her divorcee, when the divorced wife, a sum of amount for a decent living, which will be usually much more or equal to the monthly salary of a husband. So the husband doesn't want their woman to get their family to get divorced. Whereas in India, what could be given as a compensation for women after divorce is a meager amount which is not sufficient for a dignified, decent living for a person. So we have lots of issues with the LGBTQ rights in India still now. If you look at the history of LGBTQ issues, I mean, sexual minority groups in India for last 20 years, they are visible now. We have lots of movements for that. We have social legislations that have come up. We have case laws that have come up. We have collective identities for them. We have lots of movements for them, writings for them. And that is what have brought forward a different perspective to sexual minority people in India. So as for every progressive social movements in India. And social work is also part of that. We partner with those movements when we work as social workers. So these were the two examples that I wanted to discuss in detail to give some more perspective about how do we work or take a critical approach in social work practice. Okay. So I'm concluding my presentation here now. I think it took almost 30-35 minutes. My idea was to give a brief orientation about critical social work perspectives. So the whole perspective was that we usually follow in the conventional social work practice, we follow a framework that actually sets the norms of society, where we have those dominant paradigms, those oppressive structures, and we don't dare to challenge those dominant structures. And those dominant structures are, of course, the power, gender, caste, class, location of the person. All those things are there. And we often tend to talk to the clients in such a way that they have to adjust to the systems, and we never look in where we can challenge the system. We often attribute the failure of a person to their inability to make use of the system than the system actually defeating them. In critical social work, we challenge it. We can follow this approach. And even when we follow critical social work perspective, we look at what are the immediate needs of the person. In the long run, can we realize a kind of consciousness in order to challenge the existing paradigms? And it's not very easy for a person. It is not easy for a social worker to adapt these approaches. It's always critical. It is always challenging. It's always more radical. It is more difficult for a person. It is very easy to be to work in a kind of to work in a conventional way. It is very easy to give to donation to a person than empowering a person to challenge the systems. So I think I am stopping my sharings so that we could get into questions and discussions. And if there is, I over to Satyamurthy sir, please.
I think Niveda is here. We have our president of Social Forum is here, sir, to consolidate, and she'll ask questions. And Niveda, you are there?
Yes.
Niveda,
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Please,
Yes, sir.
you can start question one by one, and you can read the question.
Okay.
Then sir will respond. Okay. Please start.
Okay, sir. Good evening, sir. This is Niveta here.
Hey, Niveda.
Yeah, sir. Swarna Hari has asked, like, what is according to you is the primary qualities that a social worker should possess when he or she is want to follow the critical social work approach?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question. That's an excellent question. One is a critical perspective. And when I say critical perspective, we need to think out of the box. We need to be critical about the realities. When I speak about critical social work in Canada, this is not something that I learned coming to Canada. I have been thinking critically about all these things. But when I came to Canada, what happened was that I got a kind of theoretical framework where I could put all these things. I'll tell you one example. So when I was studying in my school, like way back 30 years, we have some pictures in the book. So in the science book, there is a picture that shows, okay, you go to a nearby river with your friend, and there is a picture of two kids going to sitting in the near river. And I was looking at the picture of the student. The picture of the student has shoes in their, they wear shoes, they wear very nice uniforms. And I never had a shoe in my school life. I had a sandal when I was in grade 10. I mean, when I reached 10th class. So the question was that the picture in the textbook does not resemble my life. And that was some of the critical thing that I had. And I never thought about this critical social work paradigm at that moment. But if you look at those frames and pictures in that we come across with everyday life, all the newspapers, news things, we need to have a kind of critical dimension that we need to challenge. That is
I'll
one thing.
Yes,
also,
sir.
Critical analytical framework is one thing, one key thing, and subsequently that will actually help you to develop the strategies to develop to work for like in a critical framework in social practice. Okay.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Niveda, sorry to interfere. And
Yes.
sir, with your permission, I'm also following the YouTube link, and we are live streaming there. There are a few questions raised. I'll ask one from YouTube also, sir. Niveda can ask from that. Now, I'm reading for YouTube questions, sir. What are the critical social work approaches in Canada? I repeat, what are the critical social work approaches in Canada? Miss Sangeeta Antonio has asked.
Yeah. So I'll talk about two dimensions of it. One is social work education as well as one is social work practice. So I'm mostly in social work education. It's a very interesting question. I'm very happy to answer that one. Social work education, we follow a critical perspective. We talk about sexual social work. And one key piece in social work education is
Sangeeta
self-reflective
Antonio has asked.
analysis. You look at the social location of a person, of a social worker, and you discuss how that social location of the person affects their relationship with the client. And when you say social location, see, in Canada, social workers work mostly with Aboriginal people and people of color or immigrant people. And so immigrant people and Aboriginal people form a major portion of the social work clients in Canada. So if you are a white person, you have a privilege and advantage. If you are a white male, you have a privilege. And how does your white identity gives you power over your clients? How conscious you are in managing that power and privileges. So it's all self-reflective in the process. So the students write a self-reflective assignment, and where they talk about my identity as a white person, as a white male, has this power that I should be very conscious about when I talk to this person, a client who has come from a different country or who has been an aboriginal, who has been deprived in a kind of exploited or discriminated for decades. So self-reflective analysis and understanding is very very significant. So to give a similar example from Indian context, you are from a person for an upper caste, you are a white male, and you become very handsome, and that has a social occasion, and your parents are highly educated. You look at that character of A and B, and you are a character that's exemplify A, and there is nothing wrong in that. It is not your fault, or it is not your virtue or fault. It is a reality. But how do you that reality affects your relationship with the client is very significant. So one is the self-reflective learning about the privilege and advantages of a person in this education sector, and we teach a lot about social work education in a critical paradigm. This practice context, social workers go for rallies, they do protest. You can see social workers being part of the union and otherwise protesting. And there is a rally coming up this Friday for against social discrimination, and you see all these protest rallies, social workers becoming part of it, social workers going for those rallies, and they're getting to the public action, social action in several ways. Okay. So critical social work paradigms are followed, very clearly followed in many dimensions in Canadian context as well. But of course, there are people who doesn't get into this dimension, but follow some kind of conventional ways of social practice also. Thank you. Thanks for the question.
Niveda, you can ask question from the webinar, please. Niveda? Hello,
Yes, sir.
Niveda?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Yes, sir. I'm here, sir.
please.
Sir, this question is from Shruti. She has
Mhm.
two questions about oppression and marginalization, sir. First question is, she says this marginalization is a serious problem in India. So how can we, as a social worker, demonstrate on anti-oppressive practices? And the second question is oppression is the cause for the resources and the political power that is inherited by the capitalistic societies?
Yeah, I will answer by looking at the first one. Marginalization is a serious problem. Social work demonstrates an anti-oppressive practice. Yeah.
Yes,
So,
sir.
uh, as I said, social work has a kind of basis in it has had a basis in charity framework of social work, because charity comes from a religious framework. It had a framework that was rooted in psychological approaches of modifying the behavior. It also takes a radical progressive critical approach where we look at the challenging the institutions and structures. Anti-oppressive practice is one offshoot of all these progressive practice framework, and anti-oppressive practice is followed in lots of developing world as well as in India. And anti-oppressive practice actually looks at challenging all forms of oppression that affects the people that we work with. Again, it goes back to some of the structures uh, that affects, and like even the social worker himself or herself could be part of that oppressive elements. So anti-oppressive, the practice of anti-oppressive practice in social work is similar to what I discussed earlier. There are several ways of doing it. Looking at the context of the individual, the societal context, the cultural and religious context of the society. And next question was, this oppression is the cause of for resources and political power inherent in capitalistic societies. I'm not very sure if I got that question, but I will try to answer from a different perspective. So inequity exists in all the societies. But if you look at, of course, capitalism, like social work has originated from capitalism. And not actually, we can't say that, but social work as a profession originated in capitalist countries. And capitalism has always been one of the reasons for exploitation, no question about that. But so as, along with the economic framework of capitalism, there are other social factors that is also contribute to the oppression. But if you look at other way around, let me give an example of laborers in a capitalist country, be it America, be it any European country, be it Canada. There is more rights for laborers, more ensured minimum wage for laborers than in many developing countries, than from India. Immediate lockdown or immediate firing of a person from a job without any security does not happen here. There is government support for a laborer. So, so what I'm trying to say is that, even though there is exploitation happening as part of capitalism, there is also more measures in place to support the labor. That is also there. And on another note, there is, if you look at the equity factors, there is more equity among in capitalist countries than many other countries. Like, if you look at the world inequality index, I think I told it in the right way, you will see US and Canada has more equity between the haves and have-nots, rich and poor, than India and China. So it's interesting. So there is more socialistic elements happening in capitalist countries than in India or China. So yeah, this is a topic worth discussing further, but I'm stopping here for lack of time. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Sir,
Thank you, sir.
Niveda, I will ask from YouTube.
Okay, sir.
One,
Okay, sir. Okay, sir.
there is a question they are asking: what is the difference between social activism and critical social work? What is the difference between social activism and critical social work?
Critical social work basically falls within the social work paradigm. So social work as a discipline, as a profession, as an academia, whereas social activism could be taken up by anyone. Like, we don't have to be a social worker to be a social activist. And very interestingly, critical social workers work along with people from other field. It could be politicians, it could be sociologists, it could be psychologists, it could be anthropologists, it could be community worker, it could be a students movement, it could be fishermen movements. We network with other people in order to achieve the objectives set by critical social work practice. Thank you.
Niveda, you can ask. Niveda, you can
Yes,
ask
sir.
from.
Yes, sir. Sir, actually, Asra Khan has asked, what is the relationship between poverty and patriarchy, sir?
Oh, that's very interesting. What is the difference between poverty and patriarchy? Um, One immediate answer for that is patriarchy puts women in a poor position. Um, if you look at the global ownership of wealth, it is less than 5% what women hold, or under 90% of the whole wealth or property is held by men. If you look at our own households, like if you have some property in your house, in your family, be a land or a house or a office or a building or a car, whose name is in who? If you look at the households, is it men or women who has more account in banks, or who goes to bank, who manages all these things? And we talk a lot about dowry system in India. Dowry is a result of patriarchy, and we say dowry because it is women who give dowry, it is mother-in-law who ask for dowry, and at the end of it, who manages the dowry? It is men who manage the dowry. And there is all kind of social desirability, social pressures happening. So all these forms of patriarchy, so patriarchy actually leads to exploitation, discrimination, which actually leads to poverty. There's no question about that. Whereas in countries where there is less dimensions of patriarchy, I don't say there is no patriarchy, but less dimensions of patriarchy, there is more equity, less poverty. Let us also look at some studies from India, where the women-headed panchayats have more welfare measures than men-headed panchayats. Whereas, women heads of panchayats headed by women go for measures that alleviate poverty or struggles of women. They go for more drinking water supply, more nutrition for kids. Whereas men-headed panchayats will go for more roads, more infrastructure. I mean, these are some examples to give. Let us also look at how the coronavirus have been handled by women-headed countries. Say, for example, Sweden, New Zealand, Germany, versus men-headed countries I don't want to give an example, like including India and US. There are lots of other factors influencing it. So there is very definite connection between poverty, patriarchy and poverty, on how patriarchy puts the other discriminatory group in a situation of poverty. But there is a lot more to discuss around that. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Continue, Niveda, you continue.
Okay, sir. Sir, the question from Sachita Rudrapuri is, what are the major theories that support the critical social work practice?
Yeah, in my presentation, I have given some references. I think it will be easier for you to read these references. We look at social construction, structural social work is one key book that I refer to, more from Canada. Structural social work in action. So if you look for theories, there are several theories. So it all starts from postmodern theories. Oh God. It all comes from postmodern theories. So there are feminist theories. There are social theories on social location. There are deconstruction theories that is happening. Um, yeah, so those are the theories that comes to my mind quickly around it. So if you look at all those kind of postmodern theories, they are all contributing to critical social perspectives, and it takes a kind of framework from Marx analysis. It doesn't mean that it's typically a Marxian approach, but it takes a kind of framework from Marx analysis. Yeah, thanks for the question.
Thank you, sir. Sir, can I move with the other question, sir?
Please
Yeah.
proceed.
Yes, sir. Swarna Hari has asked, can the conventional social work and the critical social work be merged, or they can be blended?
I don't think that conventional and critical social work are two watertight compartments. They are actually supplementing and complementing in some ways. As I said, like, for a hungry person, what needs to be done is first, not actually looking for the reasons of poverty, but what they need is a food right away. And that could be defined as part of a conventional social work practice. But the challenge is if you stop right there, or if you just go on feeding a person and making the person dependent upon the existing structures, that is where critical social work fails. Or rather, you just follow the conventional social work practices. So when I say that I follow a critical perspective in social work practice, it doesn't mean that I always will be able to follow that one. We may be still, kind of falling upon some of the ways of conventional social work practice in addressing the needs of the people. But we also have to have a kind of perspective that actually help us to challenge the social paradigms in order to work to provide a better service for the clients that we work with. Thank you. Thanks for the question.
Thank you, sir. Sir, Vishaka has asked, how can a social work trainee approach the government power structure?
Oh, that's interesting. That's an interesting question. Yeah. I heard a social work professor from India, and he asked me once, has any time police come in search of for you? I said, no. And he said, how many times police have come in search for me? Because I am a social worker. I go against government. We don't want to do that. That is what social workers do. We have a very cozy job. We don't want to be troublemakers. We want to be in a cozy, comfortable position with social work. So I'm not actually asking everyone to go and fight in the street. But if police comes after you because you have broken the law, I mean, I'm not talking the right sense of it, and you are a social activist, you are working for you are representing the need, representing for the rights of people. I mean, look at the LGBTQ issues in India. How many people have been beaten up by police? And whatever rights been enjoyed by people is because people have been beaten up, literally beaten up by police in the street. So what I'm saying is, so this is one way, public protest is one way, but we also have legislation. One example to give is, like, we have a Right to Information Act in India. That was actually spearheaded by MKSS in Rajasthan, Mssw Shakti Sangh, as well as other organizations. I mean, and we had a network of social work organizations working for that. We have Right to Education Act in India. That was the consistent effort of lots of social workers and social work agencies and a network for decades to bring that legislation. So we can, by advocacy, network, political action, and legislation, of course, influence government. That also involves lots of public protection. So social workers do a lot of work for them. Yeah, thanks.
So thank you, sir. The
Yes.
question from Rajastri H. Kumar is, does social workers get the opportunity for critical social work in India? Is it that easy?
Sorry, I didn't get the last part of the question.
Yeah, sir. Does the social workers get the opportunity for critical social work in India? Is it easy?
Okay, yeah, I will say I will start by answering the last part of the question. It is not easy. It is not easy because it is always easy to be part of patriarchy. It is always easy to be part of conventional approaches. It is easy to be part of the exploiter. It is always easy to be part of the dominant political parties. If you challenge, it is not easy. It is not easy, and it is very it is very easy to feed a person who comes to you, hungry person in front of you. It is very easy to feed a person. But exploring why this person is poor, exploring how can we give a decent, dignified livelihood for this person, where that this person does not become dependent upon you, is a risky, troublesome route that you take. And critical social work ask for that. It's not very easy. So yeah, so you get all opportunities. So there is nobody gives you an opportunity for this one. It is you as a social worker, you follow the framework. So I have been teaching a critical social work practice in Canada, and in one of their final papers they have to reflect upon what do you think about critical social practice. Do you think you can practice it? And some students will say, okay, this is wonderful, I wanted to apply this one in my practice. And some will say, I don't think I can use it. That's okay. That's okay. So, people have their own personal preferences based upon their own ideological understandings and their own interest, the risk that it can take. But my suggestion is that we need to know these things, these different framework, and at least try to put them into practice. So nobody gives an opportunity. You have to find out an opportunity for you to practice a progressive critical social work framework. Thank you.
So thank you, sir. Jasper Daniel has asked, in country like India, following critical social work approach is biased according to the current political scenario. So she want to comment on that, sir. She want you to comment on that statement.
In the current context of India, not only in the current context, but in a given context in India, in most times, so we have a social political scenario based upon power. When I say power, it is not just the political power, but power attributed by position, by hierarchy, by caste, by class, by gender, and it still goes on. To give another example of it, we talk about Civil Rights Act, which actually abolishes untouchability in any form of its practice. And who made this act? Is it untouchable people who made this act? No. We don't have enough number of parliamentarians in the parliament to enact this act. And when it goes to court, which judge, who is the judge? Like, is the judge from upper caste or lower caste who makes a decision on that? It is upper caste person and judge who makes a decision on that. You look at the comments from the lawyers after the Nirbhaya case in Delhi. What did the lawyers say? They were blaming the Nirbhaya woman, and they said it was that woman who should not have traveled at night with a boy in Delhi. What does it mean? All those patriarchy comes in, all those power comes in. We blame the victim. You see how the patriarchy plays, how the politics plays, and politics is also there. The dominance is by all those people who have knowledge, power, position, and they still do it. And that is when we talk about reservation politics. I know from Kerala, we have 20 MPs from Kerala in Lok Sabha, and there's only one reservation. And why do we need a reservation? Why can't we have more people from SC/ST communities? And there was one Dalit thinker from Kerala. He said, we have at least one because of reservation. And had there been no reservation, there would be nobody. Not even a single person from SC/ST community in the parliament to speak for their own community. So it is still happening. That is why we say that collaborative efforts is required to challenge it. So I don't want to have more comments on this present context of it. And I think whatever I said is also very meaningful and reflective in the present context of the country. Thanks for the question.
Yes, sir. Okay. Vishaka has asked how important it is in the present time to include the social work, critical social work in college syllabus, because there are some colleges who follow the same syllabus for more than 10 years. And also she has mentioned that the role of the educational institutions to make the critical social work to put in practice, sir.
Yeah, thank you for the question. And I'm so happy to hear the suggestion for putting it in the syllabus. And I'm strongly for that one. So one thing is that we need to have a kind of decolonization of our syllabus. When I say decolonization in the context of language, in the context of textbook, in the context of knowledge framework that we follow, I usually wonder, like, when we look at the history of social work education, social work, what do we learn? We learn from history of social work in England. We learn about social work history in US. Why don't we learn about social work history in Africa? Why don't we learn much about, say, other Asian countries? There is a politics of knowledge. What I mean by politics of knowledge is the knowledge is been created by wealthy people, wealthy nations, and it has been all transmitted across the globe. And that's a reality. And we need to challenge it. To give another example, the definition of community organization that I have learned and I was teaching was by Muraji Rose. Some of you may know it. So community organization is a method of social work where we identify the needs of the people, prioritize it, kind of stuff. And Muraji Rose was a social worker from Canada, and he published his book, which we caught for community organization, was from 1955. And when I came to Canada, I was looking for where is Muraji? I'm teaching community organization in Canada, and where is Muraji Rose? And I don't find him anywhere because we always use a textbook that has been published in the last 5 years. Current, constant updation of the knowledge. So what I'm saying is that we have to deliberately include indigenous perspective, indigenous framework, critical perspectives in social work. So do we learn about Dalit movements in India on a syllabus? Do we learn about the history of Dalit movements or fishermen movements or indigenous people or caste issues? So that politics of knowledge is decided by whatever textbook that we get, but we have to deliberately form that textbook, that knowledge, reservoir of knowledge for ourselves to use. So I strongly suggest and recommend, and I hope that someone will take, some of the schools will take initiative to make our syllabus very progressive. And some of the institutions do that. I mean, I know from my previous university, Sanskrit University in Kerala, they're very progressive in their syllabuses, and they include feminist approaches in social work, Dalit approaches in social work practice. And how do we do that? Yeah, so it is time of the need of the hour to make our syllabus very, very progressive, incorporating all the advancements in social work practice. Thanks for the question.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Sir, Farhat Jahan Mahbub has asked, which social work methods suits best in implementing the critical social work practice?
It is there in all the methods, be it casework, be it group work, be it community organization. Let me give you an example. Let me go back to the domestic violence example. There is one woman who comes to you. You are a counselor or you are a social worker in an agency. There is one woman comes to you. She alleges about being abused by her husband. What is the approach that we take? We say you go and adjust, you talk to this person, and you find some ways of changing the behavior of your husband, sending him for de-addiction center, all those, that's all fine. But even when we individually work with them, do we also look at in the next 5 years or so, if you think you cannot withstand the beating of the person, can you think about becoming economic independently? Where your husband actually respect to you and is actually kind of respects you because you are economic independence. And that is something that you do in the casework practice. So as when you get into group work practice, you have some 10 women undergoing domestic violence and you do a group work with them. You may talk about the strategies to cope up with the domestic abuse. But do you do in the group work practice, do you also think about why don't we have a kind of collective union where we can explore why men do this one? And why don't we become a collective identity, mutual support, or some other ways of doing it? And community organization also. So what I'm saying is that, this is the framework that we apply both in all the methods of social work practice, which it is possible at every level of it. Thanks for the question.
I have a question, Niveda. Shall I ask?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So from the YouTube, there's one question. Please comment on social workers' competency in handling critical social work on critical situation like present. I repeat, please comment
Can
on
you
the.
read the question? Can you read
Yes,
the
sir.
last part of the question once again? Sorry.
They say, please comment on the please comment on the social workers' competency in handling the critical situations like present in India and the globe.
Yeah, the competence is one factor. As I said, like, we have to have a sufficient knowledge. We have to build up all those essential skills for social workers, like including communication skill, documentation skill. And in the current context, I would say it is a matter of advocacy, network, legislations, policies, and public protest. How many social workers write about the immigrant things in the newspapers? How many social work forums make a public statement about the issues of migrant laborers? How many social work organizations and bodies propose a new agenda so that these issues not being repeated? We don't think in those terms. We actually try to start community kitchens, give mental health support. Of course, those things are required. But the current context, we have to think over and beyond those contexts in order to, kind of help the people who have been victimized by the present context. Thank you.
Niveda, any questions?
Yes, sir. So Sachita Rudrapuri has two questions, sir. She has asked, how critical social work practice make a difference when we have adopted scientific approach in social work practice?
A scientific approach in social work practice, critical social work is scientific in nature. So they are not mutually contrary. When we say scientific, what do you mean by scientific? We have a scientific method to follow. We have a scientific theory to follow. We have a scientific skill set that to follow. So this is also scientific. And maybe, I don't know, people often refer to evidence-based approaches. An evidence-based approach also comes from all those mostly psychological approaches focusing upon behavioral changes of the person. That is there, that is accepted, no question about that. So as critical social work is scientific in nature. So, but the science is not the evidence-based science as taken from psychology. It is a science of postmodern social theories, where we look up for the deconstruction, reconstruction of the society, or following the feminist theories, following the radical theories in social work practice. Yeah, so I think this is very scientific. Actually, I did not go delve deep into the social theories behind critical social work. I was looking at the practical context of it. Thanks for the question.
Thank you, sir. And another question from her is, what is the licensing system to practice social work in Canada?
Social work is a registered profession in Canada. Social work association was established in 1930s. Every province in Canada has a social work college, like we have IMA, Indian Medical Association, in every state in India, or Bar Council in India. We have a social work council in every province or every state, and that council has an elected body from social workers. I am one of the elected member of social council in Alberta, where I am from. And every social worker has to get a registration with this particular council. We have some 8,000 social workers in our province, which has a population of 42 lakh people. And they have to maintain their registration. They have to do continuing competency of their social work skills. And if there is an ethics that we have to follow, there is a standard of practice that we have to follow. And if we breach any of these ethics or practice, our clients can give a case against us, or they can give a complaint, and there is a whole process that we follow in following with the case, or the case for the case with the client. Yeah, so it's a registered profession, so as several other professions in the country. Thank you.
So there's a question from Diksha. She has asked, like, even in independent women are also victimized nowadays. So how can this victimization issue can be resolved? Because even the women who are working there, yeah. Yes, sir. The working women, the independent women who are economically independent, they are also victimized. So how can this issue can be resolved?
Yeah, as I said earlier, when we look at following some kind of critical path, critical social work path, it is actually a risky road. As I told earlier, it is very comfortable to be part of the institution. And but even when I say that, whatever rights we enjoy or whatever the rights women enjoy now, not only in India but any part of the world, it is thanks to those women who have taken the initiative and who have been badly victimized by the society. So what you said is absolutely right. Like, can we think about a woman living alone in a Chennai city? And if a woman start to live, work alone, make their own livelihood alone, and live alone, they would be, kind of naturally victimized or not being appreciated by the people around. Uh, but it is those collectives. It's like, if there are several women coming together and there is a social work organization that supports it, that actually helps in some way. I can give some examples from Kerala. So as there will be some other examples from Tamil Nadu also. But there are lots of groups that support for the sexual minority people, gay people, lesbian people. So it was not, they were not very visible, but there is increasing visibility for that one. Like a woman can live alone in a flat in a metropolitan city in a rather comfortable way than it used to be before 20 years now. Why? Because it's a kind of long process. Okay, but what happens here is social workers do not see these efforts to be something to be supported, or we don't have a kind of social work project that support women living alone. Or so does social workers initiate a movement to bring all these women together and give a kind of collective identity, or there is some kind of systems that actually there is a kind of women volunteers to support the women living alone when they are being harassed by other people. Like, so for example, for blind society, I know from blind society in Kerala, if there is somebody being harassed, a blind person is being harassed by a public person, there is quickly that that responsive team from the blind association come and help, because they are very strong now, they are organized much, so that is what we speak about, those critical progressive approaches in practice. Yeah, it is always challenging, but it is those people who have taken the challenges leads the way ahead of us. Thank you, thanks for the question.
Thank you, sir. So the last question is, Manivandan has asked, nowadays the families have one child. So will it increase the old age homes?
Yeah, so uh, I don't know how this may not be very directly connected to our social work, critical social practice, but that's a good question. Yeah, this will actually increase. This could potentially increase old age homes. So I may not be the right person to make a comment on that, but what I think is there will be kind of increasing of the old age homes in Indian context, because the next generation is actually seeking their own fulfillment of life in a different way. So people have difficulties in taking care of their parents, but if we can look at some other ways where the parents will be given the same level of comfort and care, and that is what is happening in many parts of the world. So there is potential chance for increasing old age homes in some way. Uh, yeah, so that is what I think of it. Thank you.
Okay. Nimita, move on.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, that's it, sir.
Okay, great. There are a few lot of questions, sir. Actually, for want of time, and it is a really wonderful session, sir. Actually, everyone has given a lot of feedback, and now we are having 1 hour for 25 minutes session. We were planned to have 40 minutes, and it's a great session we have. And I know when Baiju sir started teaching, there are a lot of input. Sir, students have been doing PhD under my guidance for last 2 or 3 students, and I always admire Professor Baiju sir's thought and the knowledge, the content which it comes from. Really, it's wonderful, and this is very short period of time. We will be able to get the very critical social work background about critical social work. As you said, sir, definitely in India, we will insist on putting critical social work practice as a syllabus in the paper, and we have to decolonize the syllabus. In Indian context, I agree that whatever you say, still, when you say Moraj, MG Ross, I always feel that when even my students, few students are there, we give definition of MG Ross for community organization in 1955, but we don't have a definition. We don't mention the definition of Baijis or Satyamurthy or someone else. Yes, we have definitions. Definitely, the syllabus will be updated. And as you said, critical social work is the need of the hour in India, especially in India, because having a lot of requirement, it has to be put into the syllabus and it will practice. On behalf of Madras School of Social Work, the management, principal, Dr. S. Raja Samuel, Dr. J.S. Gunavadi, head of the department, and all the other faculty members of Madras School of Social Work, and almost every faculty wanted to attend. Few of the faculty is in the YouTube, even principals are in the YouTube, and everyone attended the session. Almost all the faculty and the student forum. The social forum is a very, very vibrant forum, and also HRSC, we have Immersive Study Circuit, are very vibrant. The students forum, we thank you so much for having wonderful, thought-provoking session today, sir. And we have Dr. Arul Kamra sir also in the group. And we thank all the schools of social work in India. We thank you for your wonderful session on critical social work. We'll come back to you for any other sessions. And I'm also planning to have one-day session on early social work education in India, how to revamp, how to redesign the syllabus. We'll in due course we'll discuss and we'll come back and we'll talk to you about that. And thank you so much for your wonderful session. And I always admire Baiju sir, not only on classes, on really adjudicating the PhD thesis and the patient of taking social work in a different level of in different level in India. You name it, any forums in India, sir will be there. Any communication research funding, you will be able to get within one day. That the research funding guidelines, everything will be there. I always admire Professor, and I have very nice friend of like Baiju sir with me. I'm very, very fortunate. On behalf of all the participants, we thank you so much for your input, and all the participants. Really, I think you enjoyed the session. We thank you so much, sir, and thank you, Niveda. Over to you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much for this opportunity, and thanks everyone who attended the session. So I'll be more than happy to work with everyone, sharing my thoughts and passion for social work. Thank you so much. Have a good night.
Good
Thank you,
night.
sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Have a nice day. Sir has joined in the early morning, and really we're very, very fortunate to have you as a resource person today, sir. Thank you so much. Wonderful, sir. Thank you, sir. We'll wind up. Thank you, sir. Yes. Sir, Yamakumar, sir, we can wind up, sir. Close paniklamo. Kumar sir, thank you so much, sir. We have our Professor Kumar sir for our wonderful support in coordinating this Zoom. Thank you so much, sir. Kumar sir. And it's really a great opportunity for everyone to join, and we have enjoyed the today's session on critical social work, and we will be hosting the other programs tomorrow. And I thank our principal, Dr. S. Raja Samuel, HOD, J.S. Gunavadi ma'am, all the other faculty members, Sakila Bashir ma'am, Amnalakshmi ma'am, Vinayak sir, and Inian sir and Lakshmi ma'am, and for their wonderful support, especially the social forums office bearers. And today and throughout our Zoom meetings, we have been extended help by from Professor Kumar sir, a real source of inspiration for us to host this Zoom meeting. All the students of social work, human resource management, organic development, and psychology students, and bachelor's degrees of students of the college. We thank you, all the participants, all the process from Erasmus Social VYU. Thank you so much for everyone. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. We'll close. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. You too. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. You too.